Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is McKenna, and I will be your moderator today. This event is co-hosted by Polestar Interactive and Dispel. Joining us from Polestar today is their CEO, Julian Smith, and from Dispel, we have our CEO, Ethan Schmertzler. Just some housekeeping things to start. For those of you who are in the audience, throughout the course of the webinar, if you have any questions, if you could please ask them in the chat on the right side of your screen. And our speakers will be sure to get to them at the end during our Q&A session. We will also have 2 handouts that will be available for you to download, and those will also be available on the right-hand side. So without any further ado, let's begin. Julian, I am handing the ball off to you.
That's great. Hi, I'm Julian from Polestar, and we're really pleased to be presenting this webinar with Ethan from Dispel today. I'd also like to thank McKenna for the introduction and for keeping the event running smoothly. So today, what we'd like to talk about is the effect that the global COVID-19 pandemic and the local Brexit forces are having on the manufacturing industry in Europe and the UK. It was in the UK where the first industrial revolution coincided with massive cultural, political and sociological changes. I think we're now starting to see the forces of change providing opportunity for the acceleration of digital manufacturing at a global level. We also want to show you how to realize your strategies and also how to achieve efficiencies through secure industrial connectivity and deploying secure remote access for collaboration and change management to the plant floor. Then, how you can do this quickly, safely, and in a way that clearly delineates the lines of responsibility within your organization and providing a platform for governance. A brief bit of background on me. I started as a cybersecurity engineer, installing firewalls into power generation facilities and then into factories around the world. And over the last 20 years at Polestar, we've been integrating IIoT and industrial control environments, and not just focusing on the tech, but also the people and processes. And here's Ethan as well.
Very nice to meet you all. Thank you all for attending. I'm the CEO of Dispel. My background is in C4ISR, also as an engineer. I've been working with Dispel and one of the founders since 2014.
Thanks, Ethan. That's great. We'll catch up with you later. The presentations will last around 45 minutes in total, so please type your questions in the chat box and we'll answer them if we get time in between presentations or at the Q&A in the end. So let's get started. Here's the agenda for today. Firstly, we'll be showing you what the manufacturing scenario in the UK and Europe is looking like in 2021 and what the trends in remote manufacturing are. Second, we'll introduce an approach to reduce risks in remote work implementations, including the unique Polestar LSD plus team methodology and some case studies. Next, Ethan will talk about the importance of playbooks for choosing appropriate remote work and remote access solutions. And then we will be closing with some research findings on how to measure the efficiency impact of these technologies. And finally, we'll have an open call for questions. So we're now seeing what the landscape is beginning to look like for manufacturing as we emerge from the initial waves of COVID-19. But the regulations imposed by Brexit are also having an impact on the geography of manufacturing in Europe too. The priorities in the short term for many businesses have been about keeping the lights on, but future planning is critical to manufacturing, and an eye always has to be kept on what the needs of the business will be in the future. Before these recent events, we observed how the manufacturing in Europe and the UK was taking shape organically. Manufacturers were dispersing operations across different regions, according to the degree of specialization that each of their processes and products required, either for regional consumption or as a solution to maintain or improve quality, speed to service, and to keep profit levels healthy. As you can see in this graphic on the right from 2020, locations for manufacturers are divided into 3 main segments: dynamic growth hubs, high-tech manufacturing centres, and industrial bases. Dynamic growth hubs include the 2 megacities, London and Paris, and the superstar hubs such as Oxbridge, Copenhagen, and Munich. Of the 78 high-tech manufacturing centres, of which more than 70% are in Germany, these focus on advanced manufacturing. And then finally, we have the 72 industrial bases focusing on basic manufacturing, located mainly in Eastern Europe, Southern Germany and Portugal. And the UK, which has a service-based economy, of course, has also suffered from restrictions on mobility imposed by the pandemic, and the largely unknown consequences of Brexit are intensifying those location and specialisation trends, which are leading towards remote working. So in the short term, some of the challenges can be overcome by changing process, but in the longer term, they have accelerated the need for businesses to establish resilient remote working infrastructures. We've seen many different remote working solutions and also initiatives increase in the last 12 months, and not just in manufacturing use cases, but with discrete applications with the likes of Zoom for collaboration and ServiceNow for workflow automation across the enterprise. Talking with our customers over the last 12 months, we're seeing a much more nuanced approach to operational efficiency. Large projects have been halted or dropped, at least until 2022. The requirements are being rethought or redrawn, sometimes inside cloud-first IT strategies, sometimes now being deliberately excluded to ensure business continuity at regional level. And it's a challenging and ever-changing environment, and agility is extremely important to most companies right now. And the view we get from talking with vendors is that as offices become less busy and people who can work more flexibly, working from anywhere, there is less compulsion for organisations to invest in the office and campus-based networks. So subsequently, as enterprise IT scales back its investment in data rooms and private data centres, OT is grabbing resources and channeling investment into business productivity using IoT technology. It's also investing more in cybersecurity for protecting assets at the point of production. The trend is borne out by the analyst views from PwC and McKinsey. Looking at the skills, PwC's Global Manufacturing Survey in 21 indicated that the operational priorities for manufacturing companies started to intensify after Brexit and COVID in the specific areas of workspace development, operational technology, cybersecurity, and supply chain. And they go on to say that the wide adoption of remote work during the pandemic has shifted how companies will operate from now on. Considering the current technological infrastructure of most businesses, the majority could not work remotely at all. And on the people side, an analysis by McKinsey of 2,000 tasks and 800 jobs performed in 2020 discovered that more than half the workforce has little or no opportunity for remote work, as some tasks require collaborating with others, using specialised machinery on site or performing corrective maintenance on location. And in contrast, activities such as information gathering, processing, coding data, communication with others, coordinating predictive maintenance, managing teams, processes, automated workflows, etc., and performing training can theoretically be done remotely. So in McKinsey's analysis, executives indicated that hybrid models of remote work are here to stay, especially if they support, besides sanitation and workforce safety, agile ways of working, automation, the operation of cloud systems and IoT, and of course, cybersecurity. But it's not just about the technology, of course. Organisations must adapt to the new ways of working and ensure that leaders are aware of industrial digital technologies. They need to be upskilled as well, and if the roles don't already exist within that organisation, then they need to be recruited and retained. We've seen a lot of skill gaps between departments, not just IT/OT, but also engineering, projects, R&D, and commercial. But we're here to talk about operational efficiency today and not new business models. If we are going to start building smart factories, then we will need to create more flexible ways of working and develop those remote working capabilities into the plant floor. First of all, finding the right leadership and learning the right skills. Stakeholder engagement and support is critical. CISOs, CTOs, CPOs, production directors all need to mind the gaps and ensure that there is clear guidance on what skill requirements for data acquisition and management or technological solutions may not appropriately be planned and or implemented. IT and OT policies provide the governance that will enable management and help them get things done when teams are working in distributed ways. With communication, if OT departments do not already exist, create them by building virtual teams. And this is important because responsibility across all layers needs to be assigned to the right people. In some organisations, particularly advanced manufacturing, IT may deliver all the services that engineering requires, But in the vast majority of organisations we see, they do not have the ability to work across disciplines, and in which case build virtual teams by moving engineers into IT and IT staff into engineering for several months. Some of our customers do this automatically with IT graduates, for example. This is more feasible now in remote working environments, but remember, teams that are used to working, communicating in shared physical spaces may find the change in daily work challenging or isolating, and remote communications can also bring security risks, as we'll see in the next few slides. If your facilities, teams and management are not fully, securely and efficiently connected, activities such as keeping the machines running and gathering manufacturing data will still need to be done on-site and manually, which can generate delays in decision making and process optimization. And not having full visibility and control over your machinery and systems can cause unexpected downtime, which is the downtime we don't want. And in those situations, your top priorities are always going to be safety and getting your systems back online, of course, given that every minute of having your production system stopped could cost thousands. And that's the opposite of efficiency and the chief enemy of productivity. Engineers generally are and should be cautious when it comes to trusting new technology, especially when making changes on control systems. Remember, we're not just talking about data acquisition for meeting process improvement KPIs, we're talking about uptime and availability. How do you go about mitigating at least some of the risk when opening up access to your systems, especially when trends suggest that we will continue to see cyber attacks on our businesses increase? One security vendor shows that the manufacturing sector at the beginning of the pandemic, the top scorer in receiving attacks to their corporate and internal networks, which was around 88% of the attacks. But it's not just vendors describing this, it's also trade organisations like EAF and Make UK, who say that 48% of their members have been subject to a cybersecurity incident, and half of those organisations suffered financial loss or disruption to their business. Talking with our customers and seeing what we see on their systems, we concur with that, and we all know that these are just the incidents that are actually being reported. So we need to weigh the pros and cons of providing access to our systems, whether for data exchange, with supply chain, or for remote commissioning, very carefully. And it's not always going to be one size fits all either. So where a product or technology that has worked very well for information security may not be the right application for operational technology. If that access is not managed appropriately across the organization, the impact of a single cyber attack on an industrial network could cause weeks of downtime, resulting in millions lost from stopped production and reputational damage. And ransomware is a very real threat for a lot of our customers with legacy operating systems, unpatched software and open architectures. And putting all of these requirements together, what does a good approach to delivering services into industrial networks and systems look like? And where do you actually start? There are common challenges across all the different organisations we work with, and we hear the same problems in just about all of them. We don't have the leadership, we don't have the skills, we don't have the budgets, and IT/OT doesn't get what we do and switch that round vice versa, depending on who you talk to, of course. So to help you deliver your strategic intent, we came up with the LSD+T approach. So leadership and governance, working with businesses, we identify who the key stakeholders are, and hint, these are the people who understand what needs to be done, but don't know how to get there. The owners of the assets can be directors, managers, engineers, and even in some cases, these can be operators. With skills at a departmental level, to get real organisational change, automation, OT, IT, all need to work together. So we set up virtual teams comprising not only of stakeholders, but also peers in other companies or industries that have already been there and learnt some of the lessons. Data analytics and cybersecurity skills are very much in demand. So if you can reduce the amount of time to mature in these areas, it can bring a competitive advantage to all. And data, who needs it? But in all seriousness, most organisations have teams with an exceptional knowledge of their systems and know what may need to be done to optimise a process or to speed up or slow down a production line. The problem is that knowledge usually isn't transferable across from one site to another, let alone the business. You may already have the data aggregated in SCADA, MES, ERP systems, or you may be starting from scratch with data directly coming off the PLC or a sensor on a machine. The objective has to be, what does good look like? And how can we, A, centralize that at an organizational level to benefit from those digital twins of the future? And B, how can we remotely access the machines to make sure they carry on doing what they need to be doing at scale? And then finally, the T, technology. Use the right technology and the right vendor to be more productive. We often hear, if I had £1,500 or $2,000, I could buy a new PLC, which would make me more money and save me more downtime than the firewall you're trying to sell me will ever do. Of course, we get that and we do agree. Whatever tool or tooling you need to get the job done also needs to be flexible and easy enough to use across all your vendors, SIs and OEMs, but is ideally also secure by design so that it's compliant or aligns with the NIST cybersecurity framework 1.1, IEC 62443, NIST directive at a minimum. How do you get stuff done securely in an age of zero trust? Something that we find in 89% of our customers is that they're running factories with technology that is up to and sometimes over 30 years old. A lot of the conversations we have with customers is how to expose their data points from their control systems to the enterprise in order to drive efficiencies. And standards like IEC 62443 for OT teams can be effective, especially when protecting industrial control systems for critical national infrastructure. But for manufacturers, this can be too costly due to the management overhead, as they have a very large number of disparate assets in some very large factories. And getting visibility on those assets is a major problem, even if you have the knowledge within the business to make the right decisions about which devices can communicate with each other. The approach that is usually taken is to ring fence those assets by installing multiple firewalls at zone and cell level. Most of the time, perimeter protection is therefore installed using firewalls, and the OT and automation teams are quite literally left to their own devices. And this doesn't solve the problem, as we know that most hacks come through enterprise services and not, as you would expect, through industrial control systems. And this is due to the high number of services that are required to be open in an enterprise in order for information workers to do what they need to do. So what we're seeing, particularly with the COVID-19 situation, is a lot of customers running 24/7 production schedules with that emphasis of keeping the lights on. And that doesn't give much headroom to implement new technologies, such as secure remote access for support, maintenance and commissioning very quickly. So what can be done to minimize risk without having to rebuild that production network from scratch? The cloud services provide an opportunity to bring IT and OT together. Cloud platform security can arguably be said to be more secure than any number of perimeter and access firewalls, but if implemented correctly. And transitioning to a hybrid cloud platform will also provide transparency and security by design. Plus, you only need to build it once. And by routing industrial data through more securely controlled cloud systems, you are reducing the attack surface and the number of data points that are being exposed across the entire enterprise. However, using some of these new technologies does not come without potentially high risk. And by not having the means to monitor what is going on at the industrial level, by not having the means to implement the right policies and controls, you can end up in the situation where for a lot of companies, there are multiple routes into production systems from the enterprise and also from those supply chain vendors. Our approach is to move the remote access risk to the cloud, where it can be carefully managed, and that the factories build robust and resilient OT networks. By overlaying software-defined segmentation using industrial Ethernet switches, we can provide the means to securely implement policy across production systems. And this can be done at scale and in a cost-effective way by replacing legacy switches in brownfield sites as you go, and managing the organization's security posture through using policy nodes both locally and via the cloud for redundancy. There are many OT-specific solutions that will promise to enable you to see what's going on with your networks. Not all of them will show you what is going on below level 2, of course, and may have limited use unless you cover your plant in sensors. And even fewer of them will then actively block malicious or suspect traffic for obvious reasons. So I say to you, is it a zero trust or a zero sum game? Not necessarily. To finalize, I want to show you a couple of real cases of what can be achieved when implementing remote manufacturing processes and technologies on a solid industrial IoT base. We've helped one of the world's leading brands of fast-moving consumer goods a company that produces COVID-19 killing products like Dettol, as well as Nurofen and Strepsils. And they've undertaken a significant program to standardize their factory environments to improve quality and to reduce cost and risk, delivering more visibility into production machines using industrial edge switches. We help the customer with network consultation, design and deployment, ensuring the overall network architecture was fit for purpose and that they were maximizing the opportunities provided by their vendors. And through such implementations, we help the company achieve a 70% improvement in service resiliency and governance compliance with regulations for healthcare and pharma. We've also carried out a rapid OT policy and security review to help a major global food and beverage brand begin their OT and IT convergence planning. And additionally, we designed the virtualization for OT implementation as part of a wider program to deliver 100 million annual cost savings, a significant amount of money, of course. They now have a strategically transformed 25 factories and multiple systems into one unified integrated supply chain for their global production system. And this meant that they could cut down over 400 applications to 50. These programs will continue to deliver benefit for many years to come, but of course not all of the benefits were realized immediately. And what we've been talking about today is how to work more efficiently, safely and smartly by getting the data from the systems, using the right strategies, the right people and the right technology. But what if we need to deliver some quick wins right now to bust through the brick walls of inertia? Or what can we do right now to implement change control to make planned downtime more streamlined and manage the risk of unplanned downtime? Dispel is a tool that we use and we like very much. We think it will help you get to where you want to go. I will now make some space for Ethan, who will share with you the benefits of their experience and with some interesting statistics on efficiencies obtained by OT operations working remotely. He'll also tell you more about the Dispel technology platform and how it works. So before I hand over to McKenna, do we have time to cover off any quick questions? I guess not. If not, Ethan, I guess over to you.
Thank you very much. Let me share my screen. Well, thank you again, Julian. And what we've been hearing so far is the high-level view about what's been going on and some of the details about how remote access has been important for the industry and moving it ahead. What we want to talk about next in the next two parts are how do I want to actually go about adopting new technology? How do I build group consensus inside of my organization? And what are the steps that we're going to take in order to actually evaluate and then deploy any technology to make sure that we are really gaining the sort of advantages that we're hoping to achieve? Our background is providing remote access to industrial control systems. Our customers are in everything from aerospace and defense to oil and gas, wastewater and wastewater. So we have data that spans sort of the gamut across all different kinds of institutions. But what we found is that there are some universal truths that we're going to be working on today. The first thing in any conversation when it comes to remote access is defining what the end goals are. And when you first start these conversations inside of your organization, I think that you're going to find that there are multiple different perspectives on things. So there are a couple of questions that people will start asking and they'll start raising. And the first one is, we have to find a technology that will solve the problem. It's a technological problem. We can just find the right technology to fix it. Well, maybe we have to find the secure technology that we need to implement. So now IT is becoming involved. How do we connect to these things securely? And so on and so forth. And do we want to enable remote access? Fundamentally, all of these questions are actually features. They're not the end goal. And I think that you're going to find in your organization that the decision maker, there's no usually single one person that will make that decision. It's going to be about 4 or 5 people that are involved in this conversation, everything from IT, OT, your CISO, and your finance and management groups. The primary end goal is plant efficiency. Any technology that you're putting into place need to support increasing plant efficiency. And the reason why we emphasize this so much is that oftentimes remote access is viewed as a cybersecurity problem because it has such a significant threat vector, or can have one. And that's historically how it's been discussed. But ultimately, remote access, as we've seen, is all about improving the efficiency of your organization, right? How do we essentially keep more widgets coming off of the conveyor belt for longer so that we don't have more downtime? which means that in order to get plant efficiency improved, we need to maximize the performance of the organization, minimize downtime, and maintain system control over the environments inside of the factory floor. So the key to any successful evaluation process takes a couple steps. The first one is that we want to be relentlessly focused on plant efficiency, right? So the first thing that we're talking about is going to be the security and compliance of this environment. How long does it take you to get hands-on to a problem? And then the long-term viability of any technology that you're deploying. And I'm going to walk through each one of these steps and give you our insights and our experience about what we've seen and give some examples for how this should work and what you should be talking to your vendors about and the questions you should be asking them. Let's start with security and compliance. Cyber attacks are expensive, and there's a reason why people spend a lot of time being concerned about them. There are cybersecurity frameworks that are in place. There are rules and regulations that are there. The reason why we start with security and compliance as the first step of any deciding whatever technology you want to use is that IT is going to make a decision about what IT security frameworks apply to you. If you're in the United States, as Julian mentioned, is it NIST 882, or if you Europe or overseas, this is going to be IEC 62443. And if these things are going to be in place, you sort of already know what the rules are for what you want to achieve, right? There are basic guidelines for the things that you're going to be looking for. And so IT is going to start this conversation by defining what those are. And anything you look at is going to be based upon that information. So when we start getting into a conversation with salespeople, you're going to want to go through sort of what the basic list is. And I've put a couple of them here. The first one is, what is access control like? Your remote access product should not simply be the technical implementation of getting a signal from a computer to the factory floor. It's a holistic perspective that I think you're going to want to stitch these things all together. The first is access control. What is the regulatory framework compliance mappings that you can show us? Simply saying, yes, we adhere to something doesn't usually help you, right? Compliance is a quilt, and so we want to make sure what are the squares that you're going to provide to us, and what are we going to have to talk to other people about getting to fill in those gaps. What's your security architecture? Are you using an older static model, or are you adopting the new, more resilient frameworks that people are using to have greater resiliency? Which is also important, because once you become a more resilient in architecture, you can also have greater fault tolerance. In other words, if it's a very static, rigid environment, if something goes wrong, if there's, for example, an outage on the internet, or if you're using Wi-Fi, if something goes there, how are you going to fail onto a different environment? Fundamentally, cybersecurity is often seen as an enemy of efficiency because it creates steps that people have to go through, right? We say, hey, it's more secure and it's better because the risk of a downtime, the cost of downtime to the organization is so high. What we're saying here is that security and compliance should be complementary. It should not be the enemy. So what you want to make sure is that it's designed for plant efficiency. These things should be able to be accomplishable, but they should also be existing in the background. And this is something you should really drill any salesperson you speak to, really get into those details with them. So let's take an example, access control here. When you're talking with them, is the access control process built to improve the productivity of the environment? Oftentimes, access control is separate from the remote access system. And the reason why that is because of legacy environments, right? Oftentimes there's Active Directories inside of factory floors. So it's an AD-based environment, which means that IT has to grant access. So you've got to call IT to get permission to get access at 11 o'clock at night on a Saturday because OT has a problem on the floor, which adds time to solving the problem. This reduces, if you recall, the time it takes to get someone's hands, or it increases the time it takes to get someone's hands onto the problem. So any system you're putting in, you want to make sure that you walk through the time it would take to get connected, give access, and then revoke that access for a third-party vendor. So here's an example of how our platform does this, and I'm using it because we're familiar with it, but it also ties into making these things automatic. In this case, it's a user giving remote access into the environment. So part of this is that anytime someone wants to request access, they should have a form that they should fill out. This should not be a third-party portal that they have to go to. It should be baked into the environment. Or we can track, why do they need access? It should be part of the approval process. We want to make sure that we can enforce and ask someone, when do you need to revoke that access? How long do you need access for? So we can automatically roll back those permissions. And then we want to put it into an environment where these requests are automatically pushed to the OT administrators who control the plant floor and understand the problem. This takes us to the next discussion, which is the time it takes to get to equipment. Time waste spent getting to the problem is money lost to downtime. And this can get quite expensive. So when we think about what's the cost of inaction, of not improving the efficiency here, it can get quite pricey, depending on the size of the organization. For our customers, oftentimes we find that it's a little over $100,000 a minute if they have downtime. So the things we want to go to our sales reps. So they've come in, we're having that conversation with them. What are the things that matter, right? What are we talking about with them? The first one is the user experience. Is it a simple and attractive user experience? Are people going to enjoy using it? Is it something that's intuitive for them? What is the connection time that it takes someone to get hands-on, right? If there's a bunch of steps that someone has to go through, that time adds up. Is it accessible? This is something that oftentimes gets overlooked from a technological perspective because people haven't really prioritized it, but these systems should be universally accessible for folks with disabilities and also people that may be having older technology that they're using to access environments when they're out in the field. Fundamentally, any time that you're spending getting to a system is money lost to downtime. So we want to make sure that this stuff is being efficient. So again, let's turn to how this looks. So we've requested access. IT has received or OT has received the request. What does granting access look like? And in this case, we've had our request as the third-party vendor. We've been granted access to a secure environment, which is separated from our own system. So no one's shipping out a laptop for those that work in the water and wastewater environment. And they should be given a system that they can connect into immediately. The third area I want to talk about is what's the long-term viability of the technology that you're adopting? One thing that we often find is that people sort of dip their toe into the world of digital transformation. And they say, well, we have a small budget for it. Let's do a limited test. And that's a great idea. And it helps get in buy-in from the team. It helps build group consensus, and those things are all important. One thing we'd like to caution against, though, is choosing a company that uses technology which is sort of a small, can solve the problem in a small way. So in other words, there are some products that you can plug into one machine. I have remote access to that one machine. And if I want to get remote access into another machine, I walk down the floor and plug into them. That's okay if you're a small plant. But what that is also going to be is that when you start scaling this program, it's going to get more expensive. So factories are built to last decades. As Julian mentioned, right, a lot of your equipment is 30 years old. It was built with long-term viability in mind. And so one question is, what is your technology plan going to look like in 2050? That's a long way away. But any technology you want to use, you want to have it so it can scale with you, so that the dollars you put in or the pounds you put in today are ones that you're not going to have to double spend when you choose to go to a scaling vendor. So again, going back to our sales representative conversation, how often do I have to buy new hardware? If I choose to add more, if I want to cover the entire factory, do I have to buy more hardware to cover each machine that's on the factory floor? Or is it one device that can scale everything? Or could I potentially install stuff on a virtual environment? Do I have to reinstall or restart the equipment on when I'm running things, right? Does it require a direct connection to the hardware that's in my plant floor? So I have to have change process put in there? Or is it something that can run in parallel with my manufacturing processes? And will it really scale with our digital transformation plans for 2050, right? Are we going to be adopting technologies that are going to need to be ripped and replaced every couple of years? Or is it using some of the modern technologies of resiliency, cloud-based environments, for example, that allow us to have updates happen in the cloud so that way we don't have to put new systems on site? In other words, can we do our maintenance and operations costs and shove those to the side and make that the vendor's problem and not make it our problem as the factory? Really what we're trying to get is making sure that the technology that you adopt helps support your resiliency and gives you flexibility and scalability. When you're spending dollars, if you spend $1 today, you don't want to have to re-spend that dollar tomorrow or a couple of years from now. If you want to try to scale the environment, you want to make sure that the dollars you're putting into technology here is ones that will grow with your organization. So let's take a look at what this looks like then. Oftentimes when we think about what a good starting point is for thinking about resiliency is we turn to regulations and frameworks. And these things we think are great because they sort of will inform what the rules are going to be going down the line. We are all very familiar with things like NIST 882 or the CSF. There are also new documents about cyber resilient systems that are coming out 800 160 V2 is one of the ones in the United States. And the UK is starting to adopt these sort of frameworks as well. And what these are really talking about in the parlance is the idea of cyber resiliency. And that's kind of the next generation of where things are going. We started with security, now we're going for resiliency. And the reason why we're pushing there is that resilient systems require that secure systems be flexible. Oftentimes, when you think about your security model, especially when you're speaking with your IT folks, is that they build a castle, right? Defense in depth is the term that's often used. Defense in depth is sort of a fortress model, which means that if you say, hey, you need to move these systems around, they get quite expensive to do, or they may not actually be able to do that at all. So we want flexible systems that can grow with you. So some of the key takeaways from this section are that we want to make sure that each one of the product's features are designed to improve plant efficiency. Again, the goal is to get hands on equipment as quickly as possible to remediate any problems, so that way your day-to-day operations are actually improved. The next part that I'm going to turn into is, okay, we've had these conversations, we've come down to a short list of a couple of products that we want to evaluate. How do we actually measure that, right? We're making the argument, or you're making the argument, that the conversation you're going to go and have with your finance team is, this is not a spend on cybersecurity. This is not a cost center for the organization. By adopting this technology, we're going to be able to improve the performance of our systems by X number of percent. So give quantitative numbers so we can say, hey, by buying this technology, we're saving $980,000 every year in FTEs. That is worth real money to the organization. That can improve our plant performance. That will improve our bottom line. This is an investment to increase revenue. That's great. How do we build that model? And let's talk about that now. Let's take a simple example. The first thing you need to do is collect baseline data. You probably know how many tomatoes it takes to fill a can of your tomato sauce, right? You have that sort of information, and we're going to collect similar data now for your remote access environments. We want to collect that baseline data. The next thing you're going to want to do is run a pilot, right? That you're going to take the technology, you're going to put it into one factory, and you're going to test and get baseline data there. And then you're going to extrapolate from there as you scale out. So when we talk about collecting baseline data, the first thing we want to do is have concrete numbers. There are specific data points we can get. The first one is, how many minutes does it take to log in and access the equipment that you're connecting to? What is it like today? One thing I'd like to emphasize is that sometimes, while there might be remote access in the factory floor, someone has put it in at some point, oftentimes to get out data. If it's really hard to use or it's cumbersome, what we find in our experience is that sometimes people just don't use that system. So actually talk to your OT operators. And something that you might find is that instead of using the remote access product that you're currently paying for, they may actually just be getting into a truck and driving out to sites. It's very common. The next one is, how many minutes does it take to grant access to a new user or a vendor? So this is for your own internal people and then third-party vendors that you might have to give access to. This is not, to clarify on the vendor piece, this is not necessarily just granting them for the approval process for going through their security and evaluating them. It's once IT is signed off on this vendor can access our system, if they need to actually get to a machine, who's involved and what are the steps involved there? And then how much time are you spending managing the access? Is IT involved in operations and maintenance? Are you replacing jump hosts? Are you having to revoke people's access credentials and stuff like that? What is the churn there? The next data set that you want to get is a little less quantitative, but we also think incredibly valuable. It's survey-based feedback. The first one is user happiness. Is it easy to log in? Go and talk to your OT folks. Are they happy with the system that you're putting out there? Is it simple to use? And then to your IT administrators, how confident are you in the tool that you're using? Is it simply there and you sort of say, yeah, no, we have a remote access product? Or is it actually something that they have confidence in the long term? Your next step is installing the pilot. And there are a couple questions and things you're going to want to evaluate. And the reason why you're going to get them here is if you have a large organization with multiple factories, this is going to provide the baseline that you're going to use to extrapolate how long this is going to take to implement and roll out. The first one is, how many hours does it take to install the pilot? Is it a multi-day program, or is it something that someone can just drop into the system and be done with it? How many hours does it take to train your new administrators in using the system? This goes back to usability, user experience, and accessible design. Is it an intuitive system? Most of us are used to having the quality of iOS devices, for example, or well-designed interfaces for our personal lives? Is the system that they're using also intuitive? Does it have those sorts of things? Or is it just a bare bones system that's kind of requires that you read the manual as you're going through it? I personally think that you should be able to intuit whatever you're using. And then the same turns for user training. How many hours does it take your users to adopt this new technology? Once we have this information, we can extrapolate that we're going to say how many hours is it going to take to install this at all sites, and how many is it going to take per year for upgrades. Are you going to spend it doing, these are upgrades that can be put in the cloud automatically for us, or are we as the IT organization going to have to actually implement them for us? And the final place is collecting this pilot data. This is identical to the first set of baseline that we got. And I emphasize this because sometimes we find that organizations get different data sets. And if you're trying to actually do basic statistics on this, so a student t-test, right, to say, yes, we statistically significantly improved the performance of this factory by buying this technology, you need to have the same ins and outs. So again, you should have the same as step one. Finally, we want to extrapolate the efficiency gains that you're getting from this. So once you've had about a month, and we recommend a month is usually all you need, you should have clear data and be able to actually take that quantitative feedback and go and build this out. One of the handouts that we'll be passing after this talk is an efficiency calculator in Excel that you'll be able to plug in the data that we have and go from there. This is what it looks like. So we have information here that you're going to say, this is the amount of time that we're actually going to save in FTEs, but then also how do we tie in user happiness and admin confidence? I think that all of these three things are important, both in the cost savings you're going to see in the organization. But if you say, yeah, we're going to save all this money, but really no one loves the environment and it's not very confident, we don't have much confidence in it, you're going to find that it won't get adoption. So that's the other piece to it, right? Do humans want to use these systems that you're putting out there? So with that, we've got a couple questions that have come in. I'd like to invite Julian to join us again. We're going to have a Q&A session, and at the end of this, we're going to send out some handouts that folks can download and take away with them. These are going to be in two forms. One is the Excel spreadsheet I was just mentioning, and the other one is a summary tear sheet that goes through the data that we've covered today so that you can bring that to your colleagues. Also, finally, if you have any questions that you don't want to bring up in this chat, or that you want to talk to us and get our insight in exactly your unique environment, there's a button on your screen now to schedule a demo if you'd like to follow up with us. And thank you very much. So with that, I'm going to turn things back over, bring Julian back to the stage, and go through a couple questions.
Thank you to both Ethan and Julian for your great presentations. It looks like we do have a couple questions so far. The first one is directed towards both of you. And it is, what business requirements and problems are Polestar and Dispel being asked to look at helping to solve at the present time? Julian, would you like to take that first?
Sure, I'll give Ethan a bit of a break from the talking. So I think it's one of the things that became apparent to me with it being Happy Earth Day today was that one of the biggest headaches I've heard from customers about getting projects off the ground is not just the uncertainty of COVID, and all the change control lockdowns that have been put in place in their factories and facilities. But it's not being able to get, key project staff to locations around the world to kick these projects off because you haven't been banning from being flights. And sometimes it's been down to hands-on training as well. For a lot of our guys who are going through certifications this year, a lot of our vendors prefer the lab-based workshop environments, but have had to adapt to remote training and setting up these facilities as well. So I think we've all had to think differently and look at different ways we can get things moving again. Scalability is one of the other big problems with customers still looking to expand. Some of the ones that I mentioned are doing really well off the back of COVID, and solving their headaches in terms of how do they ensure that they keep their production lines going, how they introduce new compliance requirements and things like that with vision systems. These all need to be resolved. And then finally, the headache that we've had before COVID even was solving the problem of remote commissioning and getting machines out to all kinds of places throughout the world. How do we become more efficient and set these machines up when they're more in situ. I mean, then we can then reduce the amount of time that's being commissioned in several locations at once. So some of them are new, some of them are old, and some of them may continue to cause us issues going forwards into the future. But I mean, Ethan, what kind of things have you been seeing over the last 12 months?
As you just mentioned, one thing that's been coming up a lot is, I think at the very beginning of the pandemic, people didn't have budgets in place for remote access. They hadn't really thought about it, and they suddenly realized that they had to do something. We've had customers that for the first couple of months had their teams literally living at their factories on cots for 2 weeks on and 2 weeks off. That was obviously not sustainable, and so they implemented technologies that got them in, but really didn't meet the security requirements, and so people were violating certain regulations, and they just were scrambling to get something in place though. And so now they're playing cleanup, and they're trying to actually figure out what is it going to take to do this properly. And I think that a lot of people have had the experience of implementing them tools themselves and finding that it's harder than they expected it to be. The requirements are a little bit more cumbersome to implement, and that they really think that they want to make things more efficient and tie them together. And sort of shift that perspective from being a cost center to one that actually improves performance. I think one of the other business requirements that we've seen coming up as well is also people expect things to be tightly integrated with one another. I think people have had these expectation that we would silo, right, our capabilities. We'd buy different technologies, we'd put them next to one another, and humans would solve the problem. But I think that people have gotten used to being in the IT world where there are webhooks and there are APIs, and we're able to integrate things into one another. And we expect that sort of automation should carry through even into environments where the systems are 30 years old. And so people are trying to figure out, how do I protect old machines, but have the ease and efficiency that we've gotten used to over the last couple of years with the IT world.
Yeah. Very, very, very true indeed. Yeah, that the expectations have gone way high with all of the tools that I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, with the likes of Zoom for collaboration, things like ServiceNow for integrations. There's that a high degree of automation expectation, I think. Mm-hmm. And that's these things can be fixed, but as you say, yeah, there needs to be an awareness of some of the limitations of the legacy tech, and what can be done to get around some of those issues. And I think that the challenges for that, and we're seeing some fantastic deployments and ways and means of how people are getting data from devices and doing incredibly interesting and useful things with them. So we need to be, we need to sort of be the gatekeepers to sort of encourage that. And also at the same time make sure that those assets are still protected from the bad guys out there, basically. Which, as we've seen, there's a lot of bad stuff going on.
Thank you both. The next one is directed towards Julian, but Ethan, of course, feel free to chime in as well. It says, surely the OT and IT side don't need to integrate that closely if the data can be stored. The data can be securely streamed to whatever destination it's going to with an ordinary VPN or something similar, right?
Yeah, it's a good question. If it was that simple, we wouldn't need to be, working with you guys at Dispel, would we? Really? So, yeah, this is the problem of our time, the proliferation of devices, whether it's, DSL, Ethernet, cellular, and all of these new technologies like LoRaWAN as well becoming more prevalent. The simple fact of the matter is that as we get more industrial assets that are physically and logically segmented into cells and production lines with multiple parties involved, then it's becoming more and more of a management problem than a technology problem to get remote access and visibility. And we're starting, we've seen for several years now, shadow IT, for example, the likes of backdoor cellular communications through cheap gateway devices. in lots and lots of really, really bad cases. So having the corporate VPN has probably almost had its day. It's become unmanageable. Most enterprises that I've been speaking to in the last 12 months, the question I've asked them is, so are you still using, corporate VPNs, and why, when all your applications are either running out of public cloud or or running out of a hybrid environment data center? So a lot of those platforms that have been in place for corporate remote access don't really apply on the OT side so well, and they don't work so well for that. So there needs to be an awareness and understanding that you can't quite securely connect and protect your OT assets in the same way. Particularly at levels 0 to 3 of the Purdue model, where you don't have those same protocols that can be used over VPNs, for example. So it's not you can't, it's apples and oranges, I think, as the phrase goes. You can't utilize the same VPN technologies. So hopefully that goes some way to having understanding why the sharing of VPN systems at endpoints doesn't work so well, because a lot of the time we've seen VPNs that traverse the corporate or enterprise system and then are routed through that into the OT networks and then back out again. So you've got many more additional overheads and possibilities of where routing can be compromised. And as I said, I think in the presentation, it's having those multiple entry points into enterprise services that cause this problem in the first place. And then adding to that the proliferation of cheap devices. I think I saw Kaspersky released a gateway at Hanover last week, which goes some way to try and preventing some of these problems caused by this proliferation of these cheap devices. But I know, Ethan, it's one of your bugbears as well, I think, isn't it?
It is. I mean, you've got. I think what it comes down to is that these things, when people think about factory floors, they think that there is a divorce between the two of them, and there isn't. And fundamentally, factories are often routable networks. They're old routable networks, and so they really don't have, as you point out, that there's really not that kind of security that's in them. They really weren't designed to be connected to the internet, but also workforces simply aren't in factories as much. There's an expectation that people are available 24/7, but people's lifestyles mean that they're not going to be on the factory floor 24/7. And if they are going to be, it gets very expensive. If the staffing requirements, people say, yeah, we've got people there all the time, but people get sick, people have lives. These things get really expensive to start staffing up. And there's a shortage as well of humans to solve these things. So it's not just a question of the machines, it's the people. And there may not be enough people to often be there at all times. So, and now you're starting to use the public internet to access these machines.
Directed towards Ethan. It says, can you share some of the efficiency gains specific customers have experienced after implementing remote access?
Sure. So there's a pretty universal concept of how quickly people can get into machines. Typically that takes 12 to 15 minutes on average when people use older versions. So we can get that, we drop that from 12 to 15 minutes down to less than a minute. Usually it's 20 seconds to get access. When we add that up over time, one of our customers, Connecticut Water, which is the water provider for the state of Connecticut and Maine, saves about $980,000 in FTE time every year, just by reducing the time they take to log in. That doesn't take into consideration the gains from being able to have less downtime. We also see is efficiency gains elsewhere. So once you have the ability to allow people to access things quickly, they're not using shadow IT, we gain control over the environment. IT also gains efficiency from not having to, for example, revoke remote access to these systems. So we start seeing savings there of about 85% reductions in the amount of FTE time being spent managing jump hosts and VPNs. There's also an additional cost reduction in the licensing that people have to be spending on disparate pieces of technology, for example, on Windows licenses to be running VMs or shipping laptops. So if for those that, for example, have compliance with water regulations, again, they are not having to ship those laptops, not having to do those commissioning events. So for example, when commissioning new factories, there's one customer that was spending over $400,000 bringing every new factory online. That was in the cost of having people fly to the factory, getting laptops for the third-party vendors so that they could then get those back at the end of the time. And so they're saving now commissioning events $400,000 each time they bring a new factory online. And they were trying to do that as they were growing aggressively in an M&A environment.
The question part, do either of you have any last thoughts that you'd like to leave our audience members with?
Just want to say thank you to everyone. If you have any questions as well, please reach out. You can schedule a time to chat with us as well if you have particular individual questions that you have. I know that we weren't able to get to everyone's questions at the time we had today, so we will try to follow up with folks if they have additional ones as well. And Julian, I don't know if you would like to close with anything else.
No, I think you've said it all perfectly, Ethan, and just want to say, thank you for you guys for attending with us today. I know it's been early for some of you, so it's very much appreciated, and it's been a great day, and hopefully it all goes particularly well for the rest of it for you guys.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much to both of our speakers for today, and thank you to everybody who attended as well. If you do have further questions, feel free to contact us via the information on the screen. And don't forget to download one of our tear sheets and handouts on the right side of your screen as well. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Cheers.